Have you ever woken up feeling as though your body rested, yet something inside you remained unsettled, as if a part of you never truly stopped moving? There are mornings when the mind feels heavy without a clear reason, when emotions seem to linger from a place you cannot fully recall, and when the silence of the night feels less like rest and more like a continuation of something deeper. This is where many begin to question whether sleep is truly a pause, or if it is, in some subtle way, a transition into another layer of experience. What if the moment you close your eyes is not an end but a shift? What if your energy, your awareness, or even the emotional imprint you carry continues to move, reorganize, and express itself beyond the limits of conscious control? These questions are not meant to mystify reality, but to invite you into a more refined observation of your own internal patterns. Because long before we try to change what happens outside, there is a quiet movement happening within. There is a perspective, often discussed in the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza, that when the body begins to relax into sleep, the identity you perform throughout the day also starts to loosen its grip. The habits of thought, the emotional repetitions, the roles you carry, they all begin to soften. And in that subtle opening, something else becomes possible, not as magic, but as reorganization. The body is no longer fully reinforcing the past, and the mind becomes more receptive to what it has been conditioned to repeat or transform. But here lies the tension most people never notice. If the body carries unresolved stress, if the mind is saturated with urgency, fear, or silent frustration, then this transition into sleep does not necessarily become a space of renewal. Instead, it can become an extension of the same patterns, only less controlled and more amplified. This is why so many people wake up feeling emotionally drained, even after hours of rest. The night did not restore them, it simply processed what was already dominant within them. From another perspective, explored by thinkers like Tom Campbell, consciousness is not confined to the physical body in the way we usually imagine. Rather, what we call waking life and what we call dreaming are simply different modes of experiencing reality. When you sleep, you are not disappearing, you are shifting the interface through which you perceive. And what you carry into that shift, your emotional tone, your mental habits, your internal coherence, shapes the quality of that experience. This is where the idea that your energy continues traveling begins to take a more grounded meaning. It is not about leaving your body in a literal sense, but about understanding that your internal state does not turn off. It continues to organize, to respond, to echo what has been reinforced. Your thoughts may quiet, but your emotional patterns remain active. Your intentions may fade, but your deeper conditioning continues to express itself. Many people try to connect with something greater during the day. They meditate, they visualize, they repeat affirmations, they search for alignment. But when night comes, they carry into sleep the same unresolved tension they tried to escape, the same unspoken fears, the same sense of lack, the same pressure to control outcomes. And in that state, the body does not enter rest as much as it enters continuation. This is why the experience of sleep can feel so revealing, because in the absence of performance, what remains is what has truly been integrated. You are no longer acting, you are responding. You are no longer choosing consciously, you are expressing what has been conditioned most deeply. So the real question is not whether your energy travels while you sleep. The real question is, what is it carrying with it? What emotional signature, what internal rhythm, what unprocessed weight continues into the night and shapes the way you return to yourself in the morning? Because perhaps sleep is not just a place where you rest, perhaps it is a place where you meet, without distraction, the reality of who you have been throughout the day. There is a subtle discomfort that many people carry without naming it, a quiet sense that rest has not truly reached them. The body lies down, the eyes close, the world fades into silence, yet something within remains active, almost vigilant. This experience is often misunderstood, as if sleep were supposed to erase the emotional residue of the day. But what if sleep does not erase anything at all? What if it reveals with greater clarity what has been most alive within you? Throughout the day, your attention is constantly pulled outward. You respond to conversations, expectations, responsibilities, and the invisible pressure to maintain control over your circumstances. In this outward movement, many emotions are not fully processed. They are paused, postponed, or subtly suppressed. When night arrives, however, the structure that sustains this outward focus begins to dissolve. and what was held beneath the surface starts to reorganize itself. This is where the idea of your energy continuing to travel gains meaning, not as a mystical departure from the body, but as a continuation of the internal patterns that were never completed. The mind may no longer be actively directing thoughts, but the emotional body continues its movement. Memories, impressions, and sensations begin to resurface, not in a linear way, but through symbolic expressions, fragmented narratives, and sometimes even physical sensations that linger into the morning. There is a tendency to believe that rest is something that simply happens with time, that by closing your eyes for enough hours, the system will naturally restore itself. Yet the quality of rest is not determined only by duration, but by the internal state you carry into that transition. If the body remains in a subtle state of tension, if the breath is shallow, if the mind is saturated with unresolved anticipation, then the night becomes a space of continuation rather than renewal. It is important to notice how the last moments before sleep are often filled with quiet intensity, the replay of conversations, the anticipation of future scenarios, the subtle negotiation with outcomes that have not yet arrived. Even when there is silence, the internal dialogue rarely stops completely, and in that space, the body absorbs the tone of these thoughts, not as language, but as sensation. This is how an emotional signature is formed, one that continues into the deeper layers of sleep. In many cases, the sensation of waking up already tired is not a reflection of physical exhaustion, but of emotional continuity. The system has not found a point of resolution. Instead, it has continued processing the same patterns, only without the conscious filters that organize them during the day. This is why certain feelings seem stronger upon waking, as if the night has amplified what was already present. There is also a more subtle layer to this process, one that relates to coherence. When the mind and the body are not aligned, when thoughts suggest one direction while emotions pull in another, the system enters a state of fragmentation. This fragmentation does not disappear in sleep. On the contrary, it becomes more evident. Without the distractions of the external world, the internal dissonance is left to move freely, often creating experiences that feel confusing or even unsettling. From a broader perspective, what you call connection with the universe can be understood as a state of internal coherence, not as something external that must be reached, but as a condition in which your thoughts, emotions, and physical state begin to resonate in a more unified way. When this coherence is absent, the experience of disconnection becomes more pronounced. And this disconnection is often most visible in the quiet of the night. There is a quiet intelligence in the way the body and mind attempt to reorganize themselves during sleep. It is not random, nor is it chaotic without purpose. It follows patterns, it responds to repetition, it amplifies what has been most consistent. This is why the emotional tone you carry into sleep matters more than the specific thoughts you try to control. Because what is repeated with intensity becomes the language through which your internal system continues to operate. So when you consider the idea that your energy keeps traveling, it may be more accurate to see it as continuity rather than movement, a continuity of sensation, of memory, of unresolved tension and unexpressed clarity. And in this continuity, there is an invitation, not to force change, but to begin observing with more honesty what you are carrying, what you are reinforcing, and what remains incomplete as you move from waking into rest. There is a point, often unnoticed, where the experience of the night begins to mirror something much deeper than rest. It is not simply the absence of activity, but the quiet unfolding of patterns that have been shaping your perception long before you close your eyes. What appears as randomness in dreams or emotional residue upon waking may, in fact, be a structured continuation of the way your system has learned to interpret reality. Many interpretations of connection with the universe rely on the idea that something external must respond, as if alignment were a request waiting to be answered. Yet there is another way to understand this process, one that shifts the focus inward. What you experience as connection is not necessarily a signal being received, but a state being stabilized. It is the gradual alignment between what you think, what you feel, and how your body holds those impressions. Throughout the day, this alignment is constantly challenged. External demands require adaptation, and the internal state becomes fragmented between intention and reaction. You may desire calm, yet respond with urgency. You may seek clarity, yet carry subtle confusion. These small inconsistencies accumulate not as isolated moments, but as a pattern of internal dissonance. And when the body enters sleep, this dissonance does not vanish. It becomes more visible because there is no longer an external structure to contain it. The brain, in its biological function, continues to organize experiences during sleep. It consolidates memory, regulates emotional responses, and attempts to integrate information. But this process is not neutral. It is influenced by repetition, by emotional intensity, and by the coherence or incoherence of the state that preceded it. This is why two individuals can sleep the same number of hours and wake up in entirely different conditions, one feeling restored, the other feeling subtly depleted. There is also an important relationship between stimulation and depth. In modern life, the transition into sleep is rarely gradual. The mind is often exposed to continuous input until the very last moment: images, information, comparisons, unresolved interactions. This creates a form of internal acceleration that does not immediately subside when the eyes close. Instead, it carries forward, shaping the quality of the night in a way that is rarely acknowledged. When the system remains in this accelerated state, it becomes more difficult to access deeper levels of rest. The body may appear still, but internally it continues to process at a heightened pace. This affects not only physical restoration, but also the subtle sense of connection that many people seek, because connection, in this context, is not built on intensity, but on coherence. It requires a certain stability of attention, a reduction of internal noise, and a consistency between thought and sensation. In this sense, what is often described as a quantum connection with the universe can be understood as a form of internal resonance, not a mystical event that occurs suddenly, but a gradual stabilization of the internal environment. When the body is no longer dominated by conflicting signals, when the mind is not oscillating between opposing expectations, there is a shift in perception. The individual begins to experience reality with less distortion, with more clarity, and with a subtle sense of continuity between inner and outer experience. This continuity is what many interpret as connection. It is not something that arrives from outside, but something that becomes noticeable when internal resistance decreases. And during sleep, this process is both revealed and reinforced. If the system enters rest in a fragmented state, the night may amplify that fragmentation. If it enters in a more coherent state, even if not perfect, the night becomes a space where that coherence can deepen. There is also a quieter aspect of this experience, one that relates to how the body learns. The body does not respond primarily to abstract ideas, it responds to repetition and sensation. What you feel consistently becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar begins to define your baseline. This baseline is what you carry into sleep, and it is what continues to shape your internal experience beyond conscious control. So the movement of your energy is not about traveling elsewhere, but about maintaining continuity with what has been most reinforced. It is an extension of your internal state, expressed in a different mode, and within that continuity, there is a form of communication, not through words but through patterns. Patterns that reveal where coherence exists, where it is absent, and where the possibility of a deeper alignment quietly begins to emerge. There is a moment in the night when the structure of your identity softens, just enough for something deeper to surface. It does not announce itself with clarity, nor does it follow the logic you rely on during the day. It appears in fragments, sensations, images that do not seem to belong anywhere, yet feel strangely familiar. This is often dismissed as random dreaming, but beneath that surface lies a more consistent pattern, one that reveals where your attention has been anchored, even when you were not fully aware of it. What unfolds during sleep is not disconnected from your waking life. It is, in many ways, a continuation of it, but without the filters that organize your thoughts into coherent narratives. Without those filters, the mind does not stop, it reorganizes. And in that reorganization, certain emotional threads become more visible. These threads are not new. They are repetitions, echoes of what has been felt, avoided, or reinforced over time. There is a tendency to seek transformation by focusing on what can be consciously changed, new habits, new beliefs, new intentions. Yet the deeper layers of experience are not always accessible through direct control. They are shaped by repetition, by familiarity, and by the subtle agreements the body makes with certain emotional states. These agreements are not always logical. They are often formed through past experiences, unresolved situations, or prolonged exposure to specific conditions. During the day, these patterns can remain partially hidden. Activity provides distraction, and attention is constantly redirected. But when night arrives, the absence of external input creates a different kind of environment. It is quieter, less structured, and more receptive. In this environment, what has been stored begins to express itself more freely. Not as clear answers, but as symbolic representations, as emotional atmospheres, as impressions that linger beyond the dream itself. Carl Jung described the unconscious as a space where unresolved aspects of the self continue to seek expression. In this sense, sleep becomes a passage into that space, not to escape reality, but to encounter parts of it that have not yet been fully integrated. The images that arise are not arbitrary. They are shaped by personal history, emotional intensity, and the patterns that have been repeated over time. This is why certain experiences during sleep feel recurring, even if they change form. The details may vary, but the underlying sensation remains the same. A feeling of being pursued, of losing control, of searching for something that cannot be found. These are not random narratives. They are symbolic reflections of internal states that have not been resolved in the waking world. What is often interpreted as a lack of connection with something greater may actually be a reflection of this internal fragmentation. When different parts of the system are operating under conflicting signals, the sense of coherence becomes difficult to access. The mind may seek clarity, but the emotional body may still be anchored in uncertainty. The body may attempt to relax, but a deeper layer remains vigilant. This fragmentation does not disappear in sleep. It becomes more pronounced. Without the structure of conscious thought, the system reveals its inconsistencies more openly, and in doing so, it offers a form of feedback, not through direct explanation, but through experience. The night becomes a mirror, not of what you wish to be, but of what has been consistently present within you. There is also a subtle resistance that often goes unnoticed. A resistance to change not because transformation is undesired, but because familiarity provides a sense of stability. Even discomfort can become familiar, and what is familiar can feel safer than what is unknown. This creates a quiet tension. The desire for change exists, but so does the attachment to what has already been experienced. In this context, the idea of energy traveling takes on another dimension. It is not only about continuity, but about direction. Not a physical direction, but a tendency, a movement toward what is already known, already reinforced, already integrated into the system. And unless that tendency is recognized, it continues to guide the experience, both in waking life and in sleep. The night does not create new patterns. It reveals the ones that have been repeated long enough to become part of your internal landscape. And within that revelation, there is a form of quiet clarity, not imposed, not forced, but present. A clarity that does not demand immediate change, but invites a different kind of attention, an attention that begins not with control, but with recognition. There is a quiet turning point in the way the night can be experienced, one that does not rely on force or control, but on a gradual shift in how the internal world is held before sleep begins. It is not something dramatic or immediate, but rather a subtle reorientation, a change in the quality of attention that shapes the way the body transitions into rest. This shift does not erase what has been lived during the day, but it alters the way those experiences are carried forward. Throughout the day, the system accumulates impressions. Some are clear and resolved, others remain open, unfinished, or emotionally charged. By the time the evening arrives, there is often a layering of sensations that have not been fully processed. These layers do not disappear simply because the body becomes still. Instead, they remain present, waiting for a different kind of environment in which they can be reorganized. The transition into sleep is one of those environments. It is a threshold, a moment where the structure of waking identity begins to loosen and the deeper layers of experience become more accessible. But this threshold is sensitive. It responds to the tone that precedes it, to the emotional atmosphere that has been established, and to the degree of coherence within the system. When the body enters this transition in a state of quiet stability, something different begins to emerge. The internal movement becomes less fragmented, less reactive. The patterns that continue into the night are not driven by urgency, but by a more consistent rhythm. This does not mean that all tension disappears, but it changes the way tension is processed. It becomes less dominant, less repetitive, less defining. In contrast, when the transition into sleep carries a high level of internal noise, the experience of the night tends to reflect that intensity. Thoughts may not remain in their usual form, but their emotional charge persists. The body continues to respond as if the day has not yet ended. This creates a form of continuity that feels like rest on the surface, but beneath it, the system remains active in a way that prevents deeper restoration. There is a relationship between the way attention is held and the way the body responds. Attention that is scattered, reactive, or overloaded creates a different internal environment than attention that is steady, contained, and less driven by immediate concerns. This is not about achieving perfection, but about recognizing the difference in how these states influence the transition into sleep. In many cases, the sense of connection that people seek is not absent, but obscured. It is obscured by the density of internal activity, by the constant movement of thought and emotion that leaves little space for something more subtle to be perceived. When this density decreases, even slightly, there is a shift, not an external change, but a change in perception. A sense that the internal and the external are no longer in opposition, but part of the same continuity. This continuity is what allows the experience of the night to deepen. It is not that the mind suddenly becomes silent, but that the movement within it becomes less fragmented. The patterns that arise are less chaotic, more integrated. The body responds differently, not because it has been forced to change, but because the conditions that sustain its usual reactions have softened. There is also a form of learning that takes place in this process. The body begins to recognize different states, to differentiate between tension and ease, between fragmentation and coherence. This recognition does not occur through analysis, but through repetition. Each time the transition into sleep carries a slightly different quality, the system adapts. It begins to reorganize around that new reference point. In this way, the night becomes more than a continuation of the day. It becomes a space where new patterns can begin to take shape, not through effort, but through consistency. The movement of your energy remains, but its direction shifts. It is no longer guided solely by what has been repeated unconsciously, but begins to reflect a different kind of internal alignment. And within that alignment, the sense of connection takes on a new meaning. It is no longer something that must be reached or achieved, but something that becomes visible when the internal environment allows it. A quiet recognition that what you experience within and what you perceive outside are not separate processes, but different expressions of the same continuity. There is something profoundly revealing about the way the night receives you. Not as you pretend to be, not as you try to appear, but as you truly are beneath the layers of control, distraction, and silent resistance. Sleep does not interrupt your existence, it continues it in a more honest form. What you carry into that space becomes the language through which your system reorganizes itself, not only biologically, but emotionally and symbolically. What has been explored here is not the idea of escaping into a different reality, but of recognizing the continuity that already exists between your inner state and your lived experience. The so-called connection with the universe is not an external event waiting to happen. It is a condition that becomes visible when the internal noise begins to settle, and when the body is no longer repeating the same unresolved patterns with the same intensity. There is no need for exaggeration because the depth of this process is already enough. Each night becomes a quiet reflection of what has been cultivated throughout the day. Each transition into sleep holds the potential for repetition or reorganization. And over time, even the smallest shifts in how this transition is experienced begin to reshape the way you return to yourself. Perhaps the most important realization is this: nothing needs to be forced. What changes is not created through pressure, but through consistency, awareness, and a more honest relationship with what is present. The night does not demand perfection, it simply responds to coherence, and within that response, something subtle begins to align. Now let me ask you something that may stay with you long after this moment ends. When you close your eyes tonight, what part of you will continue the journey? What emotional signature, what silent pattern, What unspoken truth will travel with you into that deeper layer of experience? If this reflection resonated with you in any way, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, because what you are exploring here is not a single idea, it is a path of continuous awareness. And on the screen in front of you, there is another video waiting, one that will deepen this understanding even further and expand the way you relate to your own energy.